Farming has almost a mystical and fairy tale allure to it. Connection to the land and with nature, stewardship, a quality of life, getting to partake in creating beauty, reaping a harvest. All of these things are major values and motivators to small scale farmers, and here is our story. So 2019 was the first year that I started my first garden. It was at a community plot. We were living in an apartment at the time in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, and we had nowhere to garden. I had like 2 pots out on the patio, but there was a community garden in our neighborhood, and I went and rented a plot, and that was the first time I began to produce food for myself, for my family. There was something about this idea of self-sufficiency, of connecting with nature, connecting with the land, producing food off of your property that really captured my heart, and it captures a lot of people's hearts, and is the reason many people began to start homesteads and small-scale farms. And that was our journey. I read this book by Curtis Stone called The Urban Farmer, and it was the first time I had actually heard of small-scale farming and this idea that you could actually make a living from small-scale agriculture. And at that point was the birth of my passion for regenerative agriculture, for small-scale farming. So we were living in this small apartment, and I wanted to start an urban farm. So I started volunteering at a local urban farm. It was really small scale, and just getting my feet wet and just learning. There was so much to learn. And then that was when I really was like, man, I want to start a farm. And so we had a little bit of cash set aside, and so what we did is we moved out of our apartment and we rented a place on a half acre in Denver, and our plan was to do the urban farming thing. And as we got into it, I realized like we just did not have enough capital. We did not have enough money. And so it ended up being a complete failure. You know, our overhead was really high living in Denver. So we ended up having to leave, and we moved back to Arkansas, which is originally where we were from. I felt a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, because we'd spent this money to try to start the farm. It was a failure. So we ended up having to move back to Arkansas just from not having enough money. You know, we had totaled a car, and so we were just in financial stress. So I ended up starting to sell real estate once we had moved back, and I was just backyard gardening in our little tiny townhome that we had in downtown North Little Rock. I just still loved it. I still loved gardening and homesteading and this regenerative agriculture movement. At the time, we were like, man, we really want to get out in the country. We just want a few acres of land to be able to get chickens and have a bigger garden. And so we started looking, and we found a place on 2.5 acres, which is where we're at currently, and we ended up closing on that place in January of 2021. That's when we began the journey of establishing our homestead. At the time, I was still selling some real estate, and I actually had started coaching football full-time because we just needed the income. And I still had this nagging feeling though in my heart, this calling, so to speak, of wanting to do this full-time and be able to grow food for people and turn it into a business and actually farm. And so we started the farm in spring of 21. I quit my full-time coaching job, and you know, I was still doing some part-time work here and there. You know, we started selling at the farmer's market, and we just began to kind of get that momentum. And there's just so much to learn when you're starting any business, but especially when you're starting a farm, there's just a big learning curve. And even though I had gardened for several years, there was still just so much to learn. You know, my biggest fears of going back and starting the farm full-time was just I had so much fear and shame from the past of starting that farm and it failing, of just like, man, is this going to be a success? Will I have the knowledge I need? You know, will we have the capital? If we spend this money, is it going to pay off? Coming back to the why of why are we here? Why do we exist? What is our purpose here with this farm? And I think we all have to come back to that. To me, there's something so spiritual and foundational to humanity. Getting to farm, getting to homestead, being connected to your food is so incredibly powerful. I think there's a real spiritual and biblical aspect that you get to learn and be a part of when you kind of go back to these traditional skills of growing and producing food. There's something really incredibly rewarding about it. If you want to watch more of my farming videos, I'll put a playlist right here.